Do you love me? I was just been reflecting the last several days. How many times in your life have you asked anyone that? Do you love me? It's a pretty rare question, isn't it? And it's a risky one. And I think that's an important point. Here, even in the resurrected body, Jesus is not afraid to risk and be vulnerable. It's how he lived, it's how he died, and it's how he behaves in resurrection. Now, the obvious answer is, okay, threefold denial by Peter, threefold opportunity to redeem himself. But that is just like first base on this home run. Great, cancel out his threefold denial. But a whole nother piece being taught is the reality of the risk that Jesus asked us, and to ask it 3 times. If you ask someone that you were pretty sure loved you, if you just kept asking it to them, at some point, did they just walk away in frustration? Don't you believe me? There's a risk to it. As I said, as I've been thinking about it, I thought, I don't know that I've ever asked anyone that question. I've asked a cousin of that question, which is, do you believe that I love you? Early in my priesthood, I had to make a decision that was not apparent to others why I did it, and it had several of my colleagues angry at me. And I remember talking to one of them because he was very angry and running around telling people that I had made the wrong decision, I'm a bad person, yada, yada. So I just went to him because I was hurt. I wasn't angry, I was hurt. And I said, I can't explain this to you, right? Because it involved confidences. And I just said, do you believe that I love you? And he kind of, this has just been so hard, I said, no. Just a question. Do you believe that I love you? And he said, I do. With tears running down his face, I do. I said, then you have to believe that there's something more to this than what I can explain to you. You can't on one hand say, I believe you love me, and I think you're a terrible human being because I don't understand the situation. But thank God that's the only time that's ever happened to me in my life where I've been that's a joke, right? Obviously, it happens to us all the time. And thank God there's not something like social media where people can make rapid judgments and come to unbelievable conclusions without knowing any of the facts. Thank God. This never happens. What would Jesus have done? Remember in the musical Jesus Christ Superstar, and Judas is singing, you're like, why'd you choose such a backward time in such a strange land? Had you come today, you could have reached a whole nation. Israel in 4 BC had no mass communication. And God's going, yeah, I know. It wouldn't have necessarily helped the equation. So do you ask people that? Like I said, Jesus teaching us something deep about risk and vulnerability. But then the response, I think, is important. And Father Newman and I were just talking about this yesterday. He said, how do you see that? Him saying, feed my sheep, tend my sheep, however, the 3 different ways. And he said, is it a command or is it a plea? And I said, well, I guess I always assumed it was a command, and he argued it's a plea. So I spent the rest of the day yesterday thinking of it as a plea, not a command, feed my sheep, but more, feed my sheep, more, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. That's a plea. And when you plead with someone to do the right thing, that made so much more sense to me. It opened it up to me in a way I just hadn't really thought about. Jesus is pleading with Peter, not commanding it. Jesus does command, this is my commandment, that you love one another, that your joy would be full. Great. But this isn't a command, it's a plea. It's a knowing the pain and hurt and suffering and isolation and depression and all the various things people can feel and say, I need you. I need you to feed. And so then the question for us becomes, rather than sit and watch this like some play and say, all right, well, we know that Peter did it. We hear it as a plea to us. And so then the question becomes Jesus saying to us, do you love me? Initially, do you love me more than these? But then saying, do you love me? And that we have to really, Lord, you know everything. I think I do. My gosh, if anyone knows, it'd be you. You're God. You tell me. I think I do. I think I try to live in that way. And then the natural response to that, you're saying you love me, then I'm pleading with you to feed my sheep. And then the question becomes, how do we feed each other? What are we feeding each other with? How do we know who loves us? I saw a fascinating coincidental story yesterday. I was doing some schoolwork and just had the TV on, and It doesn't matter, but it was about Wayne Gretzky. And I didn't know this. I don't know if you knew this, but arguably the greatest person to ever play hockey. Owns more records than the next three people combined. He actually was a really good baseball player and was this close to being signed by the Toronto Blue Jays. And it was his dad that said, "You're not doing that. You're not doing that." He kind of commanded it. "You're not doing that." And again, it's just hockey in that sense to go. It's just a sport, but to go. But we wouldn't know the greatest person to arguably ever play the game had his dad not had the vision to kind of go, "You're not doing that." But then even there were these times, and where his dad kept saying, "No, you're not doing that, you're not doing that." And he wasn't trying to command his path, but to say, this isn't now, because in both situations he was like 17 when it happened. "No, you're not doing that now. You're going to finish school, and then these things will open up for you." And indeed they did. Now connect that to something a little more deeper. A graduate of our school was just named Bishop of Columbus, and the Catholic paper of Columbus called and said, "What is the significance of that?" Earl Fernandez, right from this community, beautiful family, wonderful people, the whole line of them. They said, "What is the significance of him being named bishop to the school?" And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what I think it is. I think it's to say that in everyone's life, we are constantly forming each other. We are constantly feeding each other. And the question becomes, what are we feeding each other? Is it food? Or is it poison? Or is it our anger? Is it our frustration?" And so that if we said that right in this community is the next pope, well, not next, that'd be tough, but there'll be the two popes from now is coming from this parish. Wouldn't that make you, well, God, I better think about how I interact with people, because I want my interaction with them to shape how they're going to be pope, right? I would think, in the best sense of that word. Not in a controlling sense, but to say, if the next pope was, or two popes away was in this community, how do I live differently? And of course, that begs the question then to say, you don't need that to be the case, to say, I want my interactions with people to feed them as Jesus' interactions fed them. And that even when he was wrongly accused, and even when it was all spinning away from him, he just pled for people. He was always interceding and pleading for people. At a time when so many people are angry, and so many people, I was just telling someone this story last week. I'd been ordained about 5 months. I was doing a baptism, and this woman, it was after Mass, so I'm in the sacristy kind of changing vestments. This woman came in front of about 20 people, said, "You're the reason my daughter doesn't go to church anymore." I mean, I was embarrassed. It was just like, punch in the face. I was like, "Wait, what?" And she went into this whole explanation. And I mean, it rattled me. I don't even remember the baptism. It was a good friend's son. I was calling a dear mentor, and I didn't even know what to say, whatever. And she said, "You know what? A couple things. You're not responsible for that." And the explanation given was not very good. She's like, "Look, she's just upset that her daughter doesn't go to church, and she's putting that on you. And what she did is she jammed a poison pill in your mouth, and you need to spit it out. You need to not swallow it. You need to not be fed by that. That she's hurt and she's upset and all that, and in her pain, that's what she gave you. You don't need to match her poison with more poison, right? Oh yeah, well your daughters are you certainly don't want to do that. But you don't want to swallow that. It's not yours. Spit it out." And so over the years I've learned to, I don't always encourage this with young people, right? But it's almost like mnemonic, like spit it out when people share poison with us. But what we see in the culture is, you give me poison? Well, I got a bucket for you. And that just is, there's no gospel value there, and I don't care how right you are. An eye for an eye, and the whole thing just leaves the world blind. And of course, Jesus had a whole other teaching anyway. And so we look at that thing to go, here's Jesus in this conversation with Peter. "Do you love me?" Statement of vulnerability. Peter responds, and Jesus gives this plea. "Gosh, feed my sheep. Man, they're so hungry. They need it." And we hear Jesus saying it to us. Not to make us feel bad. "Do you love me?" "Lord, I do. I don't love you enough. I don't love you completely. I don't love you in every situation, but I do." And we hear him plead. We hear him fall to his knees, and then feed them. Feed the sheep. They need it. They're hungry. As he fed them off a charcoal fire. Again, such a simple thing, as I said to the little guys and gals. Such a simple thing. I'm feeding you for real. I'm feeding you my body. I'm feeding you my word. I'm bringing light to darkness. I've conquered sin and death. Don't let your fear become the poison that you share. That's hard. I get it. It's hard. But anything less is not the gospel. It's just more of us, right? And we're made in the image and likeness of God. We are beautiful. We have great value and worth. But man, we got to keep plugging back into the one who brings light, the one who conquered sin and death. We'll come forward here in just a few minutes to put his presence within us, to put his loving presence within us, not because we deserve it, but because he's pleading with us to do it. Take this, all of you, eat of it. This is my body. It was broken for you. It is being broken for you. And so now we have that opportunity to hear him say, do you love me? And we can say, yes. Lord, I love you. Help me love you more, and help me love you more perfectly and more better. Terrible English, but that we would do that well. And then he says, well, then feed my sheep. There's the challenge. Like I said, it's an invitation and a challenge. We've come here to receive it so that we can go out there and live it. Anything less is just of the head. And this is not an academic course. It's a way to live. It's a way of life. And it's very challenging. I get it. But as I said, anything less, well, it isn't the light that just peeked out there in the midst of this gray. It's just more gray. And we want light. We want life. We want justice. We want peace. And at this table is where it's going to start for us today. The past is the past. We bring our knowledge and wisdom from those experiences, but all we got, brothers and sisters, is right now. And it's coming our way in just a few minutes. May God be praised.